I have a personal stake in this video because I actually was a milkman for a bit. That's me in the co-op milk float. Boring story. I had a job at IBM that I wasn't very good at, so I thought I'd have a crack at being a milkman. Problem was, I wasn't very good at that either. You need a great short-term memory, passing 2 strawberry yogg to 32, 1 stera to 34, 2 gold tops to 34A. Turned out I didn't have a great short-term memory. I remember a sad Sunday afternoon when they sent someone out to hurry things along because all the other rounds were finished and the people at the dairy wanted to go home. Anyway, I thought maybe begin with actual personal recollections, and though this job didn't last long, I'd heard a few anecdotes from the older men. Yeah, I know, but as it happens, they were men, mostly. This was in 1976 or so, which meant that some of them remembered the days of horse-drawn milk carts. The man who had the misfortune to train me was convinced that the horses had been better than electric milk floats. They knew the round as well as the milkman did, he reckoned. They'd stop in the right places and could be summoned with a whistle, so you didn't have to keep walking back to the milk float in between deliveries. He also taught me one of the fiddles that most of the men used. You got an allowance for breakages, brokes, which meant that you could drink a pint of milk, then smash the bottle and claim it against your allowance. The technique for breaking the bottle was to insert a stone, replace the foil cap, and shake it up and down. This produced a clean-ish break, and the bottle could then be put into a crate and claimed. At the time, you could tell what kind of area a milk float was going to by the type of milk loaded on it. The stera, sterilised long-life milk, tended to go to poorer areas. The reason was that, historically, people in those areas didn't have a fridge. I think by that time they did have fridges, but I suppose they'd got used to the taste of the stuff in their tea, and the habit just stuck. I remember a little kid approaching me to ask for "bottle of drinking milk." It wasn't an expression I'd heard before, but I worked out that he simply meant non-sterilised milk. You really wouldn't want to drink the sterilised stuff. I also heard of a relief milkman who spent an hour looking for a place called Bottom Bell Road because of an ambiguous note in the roundsman's book, only to find that Bottom Bell was just an instruction on which buzzer to ring in a block of flats. And that, I'm afraid, is my selection of personal amusing anecdotes. So I'll get on with... Oh, not now, Ernie. Yeah, and you can shut up. Anyway, milkmen, eh? Or, as I suppose I should say, milk people. Always tarred with something of a racy, saucy reputation. Here's a maddening story from the 18th century about a female milk seller. A few days ago, one of the sharping punks of the town, that is, ladies of the night, pretending to fall in labour in the street near Whitechapel Church, had gotten together an abundance of gaping spectators. A milkwoman coming by, who perhaps knew the town as well as herself, undertook to do the business of laying her before this hopeful company, and very dexterously took from under her clothes a great bundle, to the no small satisfaction of the spectators, who used Mrs. Punk in the straw, but very indifferently after her delivery. And that's as far as it goes. The rest of the story is missing. The milkwoman and the punk seem to have had some kind of plan. The punk goes into pretend labour, they deliver a pretend baby, and what? Someone picks the pockets of the crowd? Makes a daring escape? Is this part linked to the bit above it where someone grabs a sword and tries to escape but is apprehended and taken to jail? I don't know. Never will know. But if you were writing a period story about London lowlife, it would be a great start. Anywho, as we all know, by Dickensian times, each street hosted a big show-stopping number, and if you wanted to grind your knife, that's not a euphemism, buy sweet red roses, or indeed needed some milk, then you went out and filled your can. Also not a euphemism. And even in the 19th century, there was an assumption that the milkman might have an illicit dabble in the creamy fullness at the opening of the jug. That is a euphemism. You didn't get this from the roundsman of the co-op in All Green. Of course, when the trains came along, it changed everything. You could, for example, produce milk in the westest of the West Country and then sell it in London. By 1923, 282 million gallons of milk were being transported annually by rail. A typical creamery would load a couple of milk tank wagons a day with a single 3,000 imperial gallon 3-axle wagon carrying enough pasteurized milk to supply the needs of about 35,000 people. The 12,000 kilogram wagon loaded with 3,000 imperial gallons of milk weighed as much as a loaded passenger carriage. Well, I hope you got all that. I'm not doing it again. Meanwhile, the turn of the century brought a switch in the actual delivery of milk from churns on yokes to churns on handcarts, often quite sophisticated and expensive. No refrigeration, of course, but some churns were packed with ice in summer, and if your tap froze solid in winter, you'd beg a kettle of water to unfreeze it. Meanwhile, the reputation of milkmen as serial philanderers just kept on growing. Bottling and branding was already being introduced in America, and the Yanks were also ahead of the game, not just because they got bottling earlier, but they were also making probably well-founded assumptions on the extra services provided by roundsmen. Next comes a tiny event called World War I, which was triggered by Gavril Princip, a member of a gang of Slav extremists who called themselves Ujedinjenje ili Smrt, which of course means union or death. Now, if only his milkman hadn't failed to turn up that morning, then he might have enjoyed a cup of coffee that would have improved his mood, and perhaps he would have decided that the Archduke maybe deserved a second chance, and a good deal of unpleasantness could have been avoided. As it was, the shortage of manpower caused by the Great War meant that rounds were merged between different dairies to make things more manageable. They even employed ladies, who, it turned out, could not only push the handcarts, but could find their way round town and add up bills, and hardly ever fainted away because of tight corsets and general female patheticness. What a shock. The First World War was such a success that before long a sequel was made. This was called World War II. This time it's serious. Pictured here is a young man delivering milk after a bombing raid. As Churchill put it, the Nazis have tried to deprive our people not only of their liberty, but more importantly of their morning cup of milky tea. But they shall fail, and if the British Empire lasts for 1,000 years, we shall drink milky tea. We shall drink it on the beaches and the landing grounds. We shall drink it in the streets. This is an entirely unstaged picture, obviously. Please don't imagine that this is merely a propaganda photo. This kind of thing happened all the time. After an entire street had been levelled by bombing, bottles were clamped into the hands of deceased residents just in case their relatives fancied a cup of milky tea that morning. It's after World War II that we reach the golden age of the milkman. Initially, they used carts drawn by horses, which not only knew when to pause outside which house while completing the round, but were usually better at adding up the bills and remembering which flavour yoghurt went to each doorstep. And this is when you start getting headlines like these. Ooh. Ah. Ding dong. Yes, at last we've made it to the zenith of the age of the amorous milkman. Cue Ernie! Benny Hill was a bit of a down-market comedian at this point, so we tried to look down on this song, but it actually is pretty funny. I mean, come on! A milk cart pulled by a horse called Trigger? That's funny! And there was Ernie, who drove the fastest milk cart in the West, and Trigger, who pulled the fastest milk cart in the West. That's very funny. Of course, in the sexploitative 70s, there was a film called The Amorous Milkman. It had some famous actors, including Diana Dawes, Bill Fraser, Megs Jenkins and Sam Kidd, but it was not a great film. Citizen Kane, it wasn't. It had an X certificate, which was the only reason why I went to see it. I mean, why anyone went to see it. It was in the same vein as Confessions of a Window Cleaner, etc. You get the idea. And the postcards went on and on and on until the milk delivery business was hit by a catastrophe when it lost its monopoly. Suddenly, you could just go out and buy any kind of milk in any kind of shop. Milk was an obvious loss leader for supermarkets, and this was when people started to save a little money by cancelling their delivery. Plastic one-time cartons were introduced, and it seemed that there was no more need for a daily milk delivery than there was for a daily delivery of carpet shampoo or cat litter. And though milk delivery never quite went away, it was different now. The rounds had to be more spread out to make them worthwhile. So diesel trucks replaced electric floats, and that cherished noise of electric hum mixed with bouts of tuneless whistling and the clank of bottles was, seemingly, gone forever. So, sadly, was the Ewer Mrs. Milkman joke. Gone to the great vault of time, where park drive cigarettes, Bakelite radios and ration books lie on neglected racks of shelving, along with football pools, the $6 million man and Dixon of Dock Green. And so we bid farewell to Milkmen. All those 4 o'clock morning starts and the slog through miserable British weather were disregarded and cast into the void with a stroke of the prime ministerial pen, wielded, here's a surprise, not by Margaret Thatcher, but her successor, John Major, who always seemed quite nice, actually, apart from being the only man in the world who somehow had the ghost of a moustache on his upper lip, in spite of never actually having had a moustache. Anyway, cold milk in clinking glass, straight from doorstep to cereal bowl. I kind of miss it, though I suspect that milk is a good deal cheaper now. Not that this is much of a comfort to farmers, some of whom have actually had to sell 1 or 2 of their Range Rovers since Tesco and Asda managed to crush the price they got for the milk. Just kidding. Obviously this has been a massive problem for dairy farmers, and it's clearly put many out of business. And it all goes to show that it's always possible to save money if you're just prepared to take away jobs from some, rip off others, and make life for everyone just that important bit nastier. Anyway, if you have been, thanks for listening.